Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session on my Rumination News Network. Thank you so much for joining. And where have you been? I noticed that you are not watching the videos as you did watch them. And if you don't watch the videos, remember now that YouTube sometimes throttle the videos. YouTube throttles videos sometimes, which means that they bury them in the algorithm, which means that you will not see them. So the best thing to do is to check the channel daily to see what has been posted. You are the ones who said post daily. At the end of the day, you don't watch them. So what's the sense posting daily if you're not watching them? It's very important that you watch them because the algorithm is very unpredictable, throttles videos, and then the channel is going to be suppressed. Very important that you understand that. Now, today's topic, the title of today's topic I have chosen is Jamaica versus Trinidad versus Guyana. Which country has the worst cost of living in 2024? And maybe one other day we can deal with Barbados. Barbados is high cost of living. The cost of living crisis is crushing families across the Caribbean, but which country has its or has the worst report? Today we compare Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana to reveal the truth behind food prices, rent, utilities, transport costs, wages and inflation. As Caribbean governments insist inflation is under control, ordinary people are struggling more than ever. Is it bad policy, global manipulation, or corporate greed? In this video, we break down why food and rent keep rising in each country, how wages compare, why Guyana is still expensive despite oil money or oil boom, why Trinidad's grocery prices are exploding, why Jamaica's private sector and banking system make life harder while they are accruing huge profits, and who really has the worst cost of living in 2024, 2025. This is the most honest comparison online with data, history, and on the ground reality. Right? And that is what we need. We need on the ground reality because oftentimes our governments and their data lie, and they lie through their mouths, and there's nothing we can do to contest them because once they're showing us data it suggests that it's true, and data is often not true. It's just a reflection of what they have put into computer softwares that spit out that sort of information to them, but it has nothing to do with the realities on the ground. And that is what you have to understand. And so often when I make these critiques, people show me how the data is impressive and they tell me it's coming from the World Bank and the IMF and the IDB. But let me say something to you. These institutions are neoliberal institutions, which means that they are on board with the high cost of living and to price the economy out of the affordability of most of its citizens. Very important that you understand that. Now, when we think of the high cost of living, which country is becoming unlivable first? People say Trinidad is expensive, but have you seen Jamaica lately, particularly after Hurricane Melissa? You are going to be shocked. And the other day I was watching TikTok, and this lady on the video was, she was actually video recording. She recorded prices of food in the grocery stores in Jamaica. I think she was in Kingston, and just the potatoes, the Irish potatoes, the sweet potatoes, over $1,000 Jamaican. I mean, and they were so small, and yet still they were very pricey. The ordinary man and woman will not be able to buy sufficient Irish potatoes or sweet potatoes and ground provisions to feed their families. Okay, won't be able to do that. Guyana has oil money. They're going through an oil boom, so why are prices still this high? And people in Guyana are also complaining about the high cost of living, particularly, as displayed in their grocery bills. Every Caribbean leader says inflation is down, so why can people afford food? And, the price of apartment and housing if inflation is in fact down? Are they lying to us? Or is it that we are so naive that we prefer to listen to them rather than adhering and examining the real issues on the ground, or the reality, should I say, on the ground? Let's look at Jamaica's grocery imports. plus the private sector dominance, some of the highest markups in CARICOM. That's what Jamaica have. So every year they tell us about the banking and sector in Jamaica and the huge profits that they accrue at the expense of the people. And one of the things that people don't understand in Jamaica also is the fact that they are stealing money. People are waking up and their bank accounts, money has disappeared. Sometimes huge sums of money have disappeared from their accounts, and nobody is liable, nobody is held accountable. While these banks, NCB, that's the National Commercial Bank, and the Bank of Nova Scotia, they accrue huge profits. Okay, and the people lose while they are profiting, and this is what happens. And the private sector organization of Jamaica has always been anti-Jamaican in terms of wanting to develop the economy. They're just about making money. They are not about creating industries so that they can create jobs in Jamaica. Okay, that is not what the private sector company of Jamaica is about. The private sector organization of Jamaica, the PSOJ, they are oligarchs and they believe in making huge profits at the expense of the people. Is a profit over people, as Noam Chomsky suggested in one of his books that he wrote. Okay, it's profit over people. Now, Trinidad's food inflation outpaces wages, eggs, chicken, onions rising, at an alarming rate. And we can see now with the fact that there's war between US and Venezuela that is going to impact the food prices even more and the cost of living in Trinidad because theirs also is an oil economy. Jamaica doesn't have an oil economy, but Guyana now and Trinidad have economies. And with the fact that Nicolas Maduro is not on good terms now with Trinidad, it suggests that if things do not calm down, that Trinidad's standard of living is going to decline. We're hearing from Trinidad that their dollar might go from one to how much 7 TT dollars, is it 1 to 7 or 1 to 8 right now, $1 to 8 TNT dollar, but some economists are projecting that it might go to 1 to 10, 1 to 15. Now can you imagine if it goes from 1 to 7 or 1 to 8 to 1 to 15 at the end of the year or perhaps at the beginning of next year, what it is going to mean for Trinidadians living there and Tobagonians also, right? What the high cost of living is going to mean to them. Because as the dollar depreciates, then you're going to see the rise in the cost of living. And you don't want to become a shock economy like Jamaica over the years. I don't know how Jamaicans survive with the high cost of living. And there is absolutely no sort of rationale because when the dollar, according to them, goes down, okay, when the dollar is actually winning, gaining, I should say, over its US counterpart, the prices of things do not go down. But as soon as the US inches higher than the Jamaican dollar, then the prices rise astronomically in Jamaica. And that is the irony. That is the irony of what happens in the land of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Okay? Now, Guyana's price is, boosted by oil boom demand, but plus the landlords raising prices. So we have this oil boom in Guyana, but just like Jamaica, we're seeing that the prices of things are rising because they're telling us about economic growth, but economic growth for whom? So as the economy grows in Guyana, so the cost of living rise a lot, rises. The cost of living rises a great deal and the wages are not particularly rising to accommodate the high cost of living. Okay, and then they will make all these fancy highways and they fool us that things are rosy and things are fine and dandy when they're not. And our citizens often believe what our politicians say. Now, how can Caribbean citizens compete with foreign money when we have this sort of realities? Now, Trinidad also has a serious rent surge due to crime driven safe area premiums. So when you have crime and violence, and as Trinidad is also suffering now, then you're going to have rent prices going up because some neighborhoods are going to be safer than some. The same thing happens in Jamaica. So people don't want to live in next neighborhood. So when the demand is higher in another neighborhood, then the prices are going to up. The cost of rent is going to go up. That's for sure. Okay. Equally, Jamaica's Airbnb explosion pricing locals out of Kingston and Mobay and Ochi, because that's a new people sort of industry in Jamaica, the Airbnb. So people in the United States and other parts and in Jamaica also who have extra cash, they buy these homes, right? And then just turn them into Airbnb. Okay. And then that is what people do. They rent these Airbnb and they can be costly. They are costly because most of them are sometimes in tourist areas. So the price is pricey for ordinary Jamaicans. And that is what is happening. So very soon Jamaicans are going to be priced out of places in Kingston, in Mobay, and also in these tourist areas such as Ucherias. And not to talk about Guyana's rent insanity. Oil workers pushed rent to Miami levels. And that's what happened. As soon as these foreigners get into our country, then you're going to see that the standard of the cost of living is going to, well, the standard of living, rises, and then not for the wealth, not for the common man, but for the ones who are going into the country, the foreigners, and thus driving up the cost of living. Very important that you understand that. Now, let's look at the salaries versus the prices. Now, Jamaica, very low wages, and that has been because of the weak dollar, the weak Jamaican dollar. And then if you add bank fees to the low wages, then you know that you're creating a cycle of poverty trap that they have trapped many of our Jamaican people into, out of which they cannot plow themselves. Okay, and that is what is very, very, annoying to see, that every time you have an election in Jamaica, they tell you how about, the economy is growing, that we are going through prosperity. At the end of the day, the wages are still low, while the politicians are increasing or augmenting their salaries. Okay, now, we see in Trinidad salary stagnation for over 10 years, even though now we're seeing that they are trying now to give the public sector some wage increase. And people are suggesting that this the same wage increase that they're now giving the public sector. And I would warn Trinidadians and Tobagonians that you ought to be very careful, because when they give you with one hand, then they take with the other hand. They take from you with the other hand. And inflation is going to take from you. That's all. That's what they always do in Jamaica, for example. After they raise the particular teachers and nurses and and doctors and so on, as soon as your income is raised, your salary is raised, the cost of living, goes, it soars. It soars. And then the little raise that you got puts you back to square one, right? You go right back to ground zero. And that is what you have to understand. It's not easy to understand. Well, maybe it's not, maybe it is easy to understand, but you don't want to understand it. But it is the truth that the fact is, when your salaries are raised, inflation goes up and the cost of living goes up, and you end right back to square one or on ground zero where you started from. And then they're going to say, oh, we raised your salaries, so you have nothing to complain about. Okay? Guyana's salary is rising, but still below inflation, plus landlord price gouging. That's what they do. Are prices rising faster than people's paychecks? And the same thing is happening in the United States of America. We probably can deal with that issue another day. All right? Now, let us look at transportation costs. That's a daily struggle for people living in Jamaica, in Guyana, okay, and Trinidad and Tobago. So we have gas prices going up, taxi fares, bus fares rising everywhere. Okay, and they tell us all of what is happening globally, and it has to go up. And if you talk about Jamaica and the toll roads and what they have to pay all these astronomical tolls, I don't know. I don't think that happens in Trinidad and possibly not in Guyana. But in Jamaica, those toll expenses and costs are ridiculous. The fact that Jamaica is a small country, and from one area to the next, for example, from Portmore to Kingston, you have to pay in those huge tolls is just ridiculous. And Jamaicans should protest and say no more. They have gotten enough money from us. The Jamaica JUTC issues, taxi unions, pressure, and all of these things are creating mayhem. Okay? Now, Guyana transport hikes up to 40%, and that is really, really high for many people to afford. Now, let's look at the cost of electricity and utilities. Always triggers comments, right? So we have here that Jamaica, the GLP, the JPS bills are skyrocketing. I don't know, but Jamaica has to do something about its Jamaica Public Service bills, right? The cost of electricity in Jamaica is just too high. That, I was in Jamaica some years ago and I saw people trying to turn off their refrigerators. They turn off their refrigerators, and because they don't want to keep it on, because if they keep it on too long, then the prices are going to soar. Those who have electric stove, the same thing they have to do. They have to be always watching what they're doing. Light bulbs have to be turned off in certain rooms, because if not, their bill is going to be astronomical. Okay? And that is how they conserve. But conserving makes them live lives that are inconvenient. And it looks like something life in Jamaica is behind, you know, in the dark ages. They're living in the dark ages, right? And that is what our elites and our global oligarchs and domestic oligarchs do to us. Now, in Trinidad, electricity relatively cheaper, but water disruptions are constant, right? And in Guyana, we have the GPL's reliability issues plus the higher monthly averages. Now, what are the hidden reasons? Look at some of the hidden reasons why these prices are high. Import dependency across all three countries, right? Well, I would think that Trinidad is a little bit better in terms of its manufacturing industry, but Jamaica and Guyana, we are not manufacturing countries. And if Trinidad is not careful, it's also going to be in the situation that Jamaica and Guyana find themselves in at the moment. Okay, dollar fluctuations, that is cost creating high cost of living. Government taxes, they tell us that they're not taxing us, but sometimes they put it in many different areas. And let me just say this frankly, inflation is a tax. Inflation is a tax, and we have to look at it. So when they're telling us that, oh, they're not taxing us, but if inflation is not controlled and we're not seeing the prices of things going down, and or having some consistency in terms of the cost of living, then they're taxing us. Okay? It's a hidden tax. It's a hidden tax, and that's what we have to understand. Now, foreign corporate influence oil companies, exporters, right, supermarkets, they all come down there from China, from the United States, and they drive up the cost of living. They drive up the cost of living. Okay, and that is what we have to understand. Now we're against foreign investors, but we understand that a lot of time they get all these tax breaks, and we are the ones who are charged and have to pay for them. At the same time, they're pretending as if they're giving us something when they're more subtracting from the quality of lives that we live in these Caribbean islands, right? Now we have regional shipping monopolies where you have just this one shipping company and whatever, and they cost because if you have these monopolies, such as in the JPS, also, right, in these light companies, electricity companies, then you are going to see that the cost of living is going to rise because there are no competitors. If you don't have competitors, then the cost of living is going to soar for sure. Okay, and that is what is happening on these three important CARICOM member states. Based on everything, which country is the most expensive? Which country do you think is the most expensive? Jamaica, Guyana, or Trinidad and Tobago? And please tell me why you think that your option or your choice is the most expensive of these three countries. And those of you who are living in other countries like Barbados and other countries, please let me know if the cost of living is soaring in your neck of the woods, and I'll deal with that in a subsequent video. Thank you so much for joining, and remember to like the videos and to watch them so that the channel can grow and we can speak about very important matters, geopolitical matters that are of grave concern to the region. Thank you so much. All the best. Bye.